A honeymoon turned into a nightmare. The warm ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and paradise through the open balcony doors. The waves of the Maldives crashed gently against the shore, a rhythmic lullaby that should have been the backdrop to the happiest week of my life. Instead, the only sound that truly registered was the soft rustle of a manila envelope being tossed onto the pristine white bedsheets. I turned, confused. Nathan Carter, my husband of exactly 7 days, stood by the dresser, adjusting the cuffs of his crisp white shirt as if he had just finished an ordinary business deal. His posture was relaxed, effortless, the very same nonchalance that had once made him seem charming and powerful. Now it made my blood run cold. "What's this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the growing tightness in my chest. Nathan didn't even look at me when he answered. "Divorce papers." Silence. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. He turned then, his blue eyes gleaming under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. There was no remorse, no hesitation, just amusement. He smiled, slow and knowing, as if he was savoring this moment. "You didn't actually think this was real, did you?" he asked, chuckling under his breath. "Come on, Anna. You're smarter than that." The air around me seemed to thin. "What are you talking about?" My fingers trembled as I reached for the envelope, feeling the thick weight of the legal documents inside. My name, printed neatly beside Nathan's, stared back at me like an accusation. He exhaled, like he was growing impatient, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenient delay in his evening. "It was a bet." He shrugged, as if admitting it was no bigger deal than telling me he had ordered room service. "A little wager among friends. $10,000 that I could get you to marry me in under a year." A sickening sensation twisted in my stomach. My ears rang. My pulse pounded. Nathan smirked at my silence, mistaking my shock for disbelief. "You were the perfect target," he continued, his voice light, conversational, as though explaining a clever business strategy. "Smart enough to be impressive, ambitious enough to make it interesting, but naive enough to actually believe in a fairy tale." He took a step closer, tilting his head slightly, studying me. "Don't look so surprised, sweetheart. It was fun while it lasted." A strangled laugh escaped me. A broken sound that wasn't amusement but the exact opposite. "A bet?" I whispered, tasting the bitterness of the words. "You married me for $10,000? Nathan grinned, running a hand through his neatly styled dark hair. "Well, technically I won 15. I stared at him, unable to process the depth of his cruelty. "You?" My voice cracked before I could even form a coherent sentence. "I mean, you have to admit it's kind of impressive," he mused, straightening his collar in the mirror. "They didn't think I could pull it off, especially with Sterling watching so closely." Sterling. James Sterling, Ashford Global Enterprises CFO. Memories flooded back. The way James had watched me and Nathan with those unreadable, piercing eyes. The fleeting moments when his jaw had tightened. The rare occasions when he'd seemed like he wanted to say something but didn't. I had dismissed it. I had dismissed everything. "You knew this whole time?" I murmured, realization dawning, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan scoffed. "Of course I knew. The whole office knew. Well, at least the people who mattered." He chuckled again, shaking his head. "God, you should have seen their faces when I proposed. Some of them actually thought I was serious." Cameron nearly spit out his champagne. I felt sick. All those stolen glances across the conference room table. The whispered conversations between Nathan and his executive friends. The way their amusement always seemed just a little too knowing. They had been watching me like a game piece. I swallowed, forcing down the bile rising in my throat. "Why tell me now?" Nathan glanced at his watch. "Dramatic effect," he said simply, flashing me that arrogant smirk that had once made my heart race. "Besides, it's harder for you to cause a scene here. Less messy." He grabbed his designer suitcase from the corner of the room, effortlessly lifting it onto the bed. "Look, don't take it personally. You got a hell of a wedding, an all-expenses-paid honeymoon, and some pretty great networking opportunities out of this. Some women would call that a fair trade." My nails dug into my palms. "You bastard!" I breathed, my voice shaking. Nathan merely chuckled. Now, no need for insults." He zipped up his suitcase, casting me one last look. Smug, victorious. "My flight leaves in 3 hours. You can stay here if you want. Consider it a parting gift. The resort staff already knows our marriage was just for show." He started toward the door. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something. I should have broken down, collapsed into the unbearable weight of betrayal. But I didn't. Instead, something inside me shifted. Nathan Carter thought he had won. He thought this was the end of the story, but he had no idea that he had just set the stage for my greatest comeback. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up my phone and opened my messages. My fingers hovered over the screen for only a second before I typed, "The key you gave me. Is that office still available?" A response came almost immediately. Always was. I stared at those 2 words, feeling the sting of humiliation slowly morph into something else. Determination. Nathan Carter had played his game. Now it was my turn. If I had known then what I know now, I would have seen the signs. The stolen glances, the barely concealed smirks, the way conversations shifted when I entered a room, laughter trailing off just a beat too late. But a year ago, I wasn't looking for deception. I was looking for an opportunity. The morning I stepped into the towering glass doors of Ashford Global Enterprises, the future felt limitless. My fingers gripped the leather strap of my portfolio as I took in the sleek, modern design of the lobby, the glistening marble floors, the towering windows that framed the New York skyline. My heels clicked against the polished surface as I approached the front desk, my heart hammering in my chest. This was it. A dream job, a fresh start, the beginning of everything. "Name?" the security officer asked, offering me a warm smile as he scanned my visitor badge. "Anna Mitchell," I replied. "Financial analyst. First day." He nodded, handing me a sleek, silver name tag with the Ashford Global emblem engraved on it. 47th floor. "Mr. Carter's team is expecting you." I swallowed hard, my nerves buzzing beneath my skin. Nathan Carter. At the time, his name carried a certain weight in the financial world. Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning. Young, ambitious, the kind of leader people either admired or feared. I had studied his work, read about his aggressive acquisition strategies, and had been both intimidated and intrigued by the prospect of working under him. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt endless, each glowing number pulling me closer to the moment I had spent years preparing for. I had graduated at the top of my class, completed internships at some of the most competitive firms, and now, finally, I was here. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. And standing there, waiting for me, was Nathan Carter himself. He was everything the financial magazines had described. Tall, effortlessly confident, dressed in a crisp navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His smile was polished, the kind that had been perfected in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. "Anna Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Ashford Global." The moment his fingers brushed against mine, I had no idea I had just shaken hands with the man who would turn my life into a high-stakes wager. My first few weeks at Ashford were a whirlwind of meetings, spreadsheets, and late nights poring over financial reports. The pace was relentless, but I thrived in the challenge. Nathan was demanding but charismatic, pushing me to be sharper, faster, better. He praised my work in front of senior executives, included me in high-level strategy sessions, and made me feel like I belonged. "You've got potential, Anna," he told me one evening as we worked late on a quarterly projections report. "Not everyone picks up our systems this quickly." The way he said it, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, sent a thrill through me. I had never been one to fall for office romances. I had seen the politics, the power plays, the way women were often reduced to whispers in break rooms. But with Nathan, it felt different. It started subtly, lingering conversations over coffee, inside jokes whispered between conference calls, the way his hand would graze the small of my back as we walked side by side down the executive hallways. And then, one evening, it shifted. You work too hard, he murmured, leaning against my desk as I sifted through financial reports. The office was nearly empty, the glow of city lights casting long shadows across the room. I laughed, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Says the man who practically lives here. Nathan smirked. Touché. Come on, dinner. To celebrate your first month. I should have seen the warning signs. I should have noticed the way James Sterling, Ashford's CFO, watched our interactions with quiet disapproval. I should have registered the subtle glances exchanged between Nathan and his executive friends whenever I entered the room. But I didn't, because when you're caught in the beginning of something that feels like a fairy tale, you don't stop to question whether the pages have already been written for you. The office romance bloomed like wildfire. Whispers followed us in the hallways. Eyes lingered in meetings, but I ignored them. I was convinced it was jealousy, the young analyst catching the attention of one of Ashford's most powerful men. Nathan made me feel invincible. He spoke of our future in quiet, stolen moments, of the things we would accomplish together, the deals we would close, the legacy we would build. You're different from anyone I've ever met, he would say, tracing idle patterns against my wrist during late-night strategy sessions. I see something in you, Anna, and I know you see it too. I believed him. I believed in us. Even when James Sterling's eyes darkened every time Nathan pulled me into his orbit. Even when I overheard Cameron Hayes, Nathan's best friend and Ashford's head of marketing, chuckling to another executive. She has no idea, does she? Even when James pulled me aside one evening, his voice laced with something that almost felt like regret. Be careful, Anna, he said simply. That was it. No explanation. No context. Just those 3 words. I should have asked questions. I should have pressed for answers. But I didn't, because at the time, I was too busy falling into a carefully constructed illusion. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence. I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. 6 months after that first elevator ride, Nathan Carter proposed. In front of the entire executive team. We were at Ashford's annual corporate gala, the kind of event where champagne flowed freely and million-dollar deals were brokered between swirls of expensive whiskey. I was laughing at something Cameron had said when the music suddenly faded, and I turned to find Nathan on one knee. The room erupted into applause. Flashbulbs exploded. Tears blurred my vision as I looked down at the man who had become my world, holding up a diamond ring that sparkled like the city skyline behind him. Marry me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Be my partner. In life, in business, in everything. I said yes. I said yes because in that moment, I truly believed in the story we were writing. What I didn't know was that I wasn't the author. I was just the plot twist. And the joke was on me. If fairy tales were real, this would have been the moment mine was sealed. The golden chandeliers above us dripped with crystals, casting a soft, dreamlike glow over the Ashford Global Enterprises annual gala. The ballroom was a vision of opulence. Tables dressed in ivory silk, glasses brimming with champagne. The city's elite gathered in tailored perfection. The air buzzed with quiet conversations, the exchange of power and influence happening between sips of expensive whiskey. And then the music faded. A ripple of hushed whispers spread across the room. My heart lurched as I turned, finding Nathan Carter, the man who had become the center of my world, kneeling before me, a velvet box open in his hands. My breath hitched. The diamonds sparkled under the chandelier light, catching every reflection in the room. But it was his expression that held me captive. Deep, unwavering confidence. The kind of certainty that made me believe, if only for that moment, that I belonged in this story. Anna, he began. His voice smooth, perfectly measured, designed to captivate an audience. From the moment you walked into Ashford, I knew you were different. You're brilliant, driven, unlike anyone I've ever met. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. You challenge me in ways no one ever has. You make me better, stronger, And there is no one else I would rather stand beside, not just in life, but in business, in everything we build together. I swallowed hard, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my ears. Nathan smiled, sensing my hesitation, the brief flicker of disbelief that I hadn't even registered yet. He lifted my hand in his, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to my fingers, grounding me in the moment. "Marry me," he said softly. "Be my partner. In life, in business, in everything." Applause exploded around us. Cameron Hayes, Nathan's best friend and Ashford's head of marketing, let out a dramatic whistle. Executives clinked their champagne glasses. Women exchanged looks of admiration. Some genuinely happy for me, others envious, but all invested in the spectacle unfolding before them. And at the far end of the room, James Sterling stood near the bar, his expression unreadable. I should have noticed how he never clapped. I should have seen the flicker of something like disappointment, cross his features before he lifted his glass in silent acknowledgement. But I didn't, because I was too busy saying yes. The engagement transformed everything. Overnight, I wasn't just Anna Mitchell, rising financial analyst. I was Nathan Carter's fiancée, the woman who had captured the heart of one of the most powerful men at Ashford Global. Invitations flooded in. High-level corporate events I had once observed from the sidelines now welcomed me as a guest of honor. Conversations weren't just about business anymore. They were about our future. "When's the wedding? Have you picked a venue yet? You're going to make such a powerful couple." It was intoxicating. My name appeared in business magazines, linked not just to my professional achievements but to Nathan's. My face was splashed across glossy pages under headlines like "Ashford's Golden Couple" and "The Power Duo to Watch." I told myself I had earned this. I had worked just as hard, if not harder, than Nathan to be here. But there were cracks in the fairy tale. They started small. At first, it was just the way people looked at me. Not with admiration for my skills, but with amusement, as if they knew something I didn't. Then it was the way conversations changed when I entered a room. Laughter would die off a second too late. Cameron and Nathan's executive friends would exchange glances, grinning as if sharing an inside joke. And then there was James Sterling. He never said anything directly, but he watched. His gaze lingered when Nathan would introduce me at corporate events, his lips pressing into a thin line whenever Cameron made another offhand remark about how quickly things had progressed. I told myself I was imagining it, that James was just intimidating, a man who had built his career on control, on knowing every move before his opponent even made it. But something about his silence unsettled me. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, he called me into his office. His corner suite was the kind of space that commanded authority. Dark mahogany shelves lined with books, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. He stood by the window when I walked in, his hands in his pockets, his posture carefully neutral. "Have a seat," he said, his voice as steady as ever. I hesitated but obeyed. For a long moment he said nothing, just watched me. Then finally he spoke. "Do you know why I hired you, Anna?" I blinked at the sudden shift in conversation. Because of my qualifications." James exhaled, almost like a laugh. "Yes, but that's not why I fought for you." I frowned, shifting slightly in my chair. "I don't understand." "You will," he said simply. And then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. My stomach twisted as he slid it across the desk toward me. "Open it." A cold unease settled over me. My fingers trembled as I flipped open the lid. Inside, resting against black satin, was a silver key. I looked up at him, confused. "What is this?" "A door," James said. "One you're going to need. Sooner than you think." The weight of his words pressed against my chest. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to demand answers. But before I could, his expression shifted, back to the unreadable, calculating mask he always wore. And in that moment, my phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. "Big night ahead. I have something special planned for us. See you at the penthouse." I looked back at James. He was already standing, moving toward the door, signaling that whatever conversation we had just started was already over. I left his office with the key still clutched in my hand. I should have asked more questions. I should have listened to the way my instincts screamed at me. But I didn't, because I was too busy planning a wedding to a man who had already planned my downfall. The betrayal, the honeymoon that never was. The Maldives was everything I had imagined. Azure skies stretched endlessly above crystal-clear waters, waves lapping gently against the pristine shoreline. Our private villa perched on stilts over the lagoon, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of paradise. A soft sea breeze carried the scent of salt and tropical blooms, and for a moment, for just one fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe in the illusion that this was real, that I was truly here on my honeymoon with the man I loved. Nathan had spared no expense. First-class flights, private butler, Michelin-starred meals prepared in our villa. It was the kind of luxury that made women envious, that turned fairy tales into reality. But beneath the perfection, something felt off. Nathan had always been ambitious, always carried the weight of responsibility like a second skin. But here, on our honeymoon, he was distracted. He spent hours on his phone, stepping onto the balcony for hushed calls, his expression unreadable. When I asked, he brushed it off with a charming smile. "Just some work issues," he murmured, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "You know how it is. Business never really stops." I wanted to believe him, but the staff's knowing glances, the hushed conversations between the resort managers when they thought I wasn't looking, sent a chill crawling up my spine. I tried to ignore it, tried to enjoy the massages, the candlelit dinners, the way the golden sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. But the feeling wouldn't leave me. And then, on the 7th night, everything shattered. The evening was perfect. Nathan had arranged for an intimate dinner on our private deck, the table adorned with white roses and flickering candles. The ocean stretched before us in an endless expanse of blue, the stars beginning to peek through the darkening sky. I felt beautiful, happy, loved. I had just finished the last sip of my wine when Nathan set his glass down and exhaled, his fingers drumming lightly against the wooden table. "Anna," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar weight. "We need to talk." My heart stuttered, not because of what he said but how he said it. Not gentle, not hesitant, just final. I straightened. "Okay." Nathan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his perfectly tousled dark hair. He glanced out at the ocean for a long moment before turning his gaze back to me, something disturbingly close to amusement dancing in his eyes. "You're smart, Anna," he said, his voice slow, deliberate. "It's one of the things I liked about you." A strange unease coiled in my stomach. Liked, past tense. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table between us. The world around me seemed to still. "What is that?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly, waiting for me to open it. With shaky fingers, I lifted the flap and pulled out the papers inside. The legal document felt heavier than it should have, the ink printed in sharp, black letters. Divorce agreement. I blinked, my vision blurring. My stomach lurched violently, my mind scrambling for an explanation, for something, anything, that would make this make sense. "You're joking," I whispered. Nathan smiled. Afraid not. I forced out a laugh, though it sounded brittle even to my own ears. "This isn't funny, Nathan." His expression remained maddeningly calm. "It's not supposed to be." My pulse pounded in my ears. "You?" My voice cracked. "You filed for divorce? On our honeymoon?" Nathan exhaled slowly, as if explaining something tedious. "I filed weeks ago. Just needed the timing to be right." My entire body went cold. Weeks. Before the wedding. The realization hit me like a freight train. "You?" My lips parted, but no words came. "Why?" And that's when Nathan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his smirk carving something irreparable into my soul. "Because it was a bet," he said. The words didn't register at first. "A bet?" I repeated blankly. Nathan chuckled. shaking his head as if this were some ridiculous misunderstanding. "Come on, Anna. Don't act so surprised." He tilted his head. "You really thought this was real?" A sharp ringing filled my ears. I shook my head, my hands trembling. "I don't understand." Nathan sighed, rubbing his jaw before leaning back again. "It started as a joke," he admitted. "A little wager among friends. Cameron didn't think I could pull it off. Said you were too smart, too independent to fall for it." His smirk widened. "But I knew better." My stomach lurched. My breaths came shallow and uneven, my fingers tightening around the edges of the divorce papers. "How much?" I asked, my voice hollow. Nathan raised a brow. "How much did you bet?" I demanded, my voice rising. For a brief second, I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Amusement? Guilt? No, just satisfaction. 10,000, he said, watching me closely. A cruel laugh bubbled in my throat, sharp and jagged. "You married me? For $10,000? Nathan shrugged. 15, actually. Some of the guys upped the stakes once they saw how fast it was going. Everything inside me twisted. Every memory, every moment, every whispered promise. It was all a game. "You're lying," I breathed. Nathan's smirk faded slightly, his gaze sharpening. "You think I'd waste my time making this up?" I felt sick. I felt stupid. I felt angry. White-hot fury replaced the horror coursing through me, shaking me to my core. "You!" My voice trembled, but this time it wasn't with pain. "You really think you've won?" Nathan chuckled again, completely unfazed. "Anna, sweetheart, I won the second you said, 'I do.'" I stood so abruptly my chair scraped against the deck. "You're disgusting." Nathan merely sighed, as if this was inconvenient rather than earth-shattering. "Look, don't take it personally," he said. "You got a fantastic wedding, an all-expenses-paid honeymoon, and plenty of networking opportunities. Some would call that a fair trade." My vision blurred with red. "Why tell me here?" I whispered, my voice dangerously calm. Nathan stood, brushing imaginary lint from his shirt. Dramatic flair. "And let's be honest, it's harder for you to cause a scene here. No reporters, no cameras, just a clean break." His eyes flicked to his watch. "My flight leaves in 3 hours. That's when I realized. He was leaving, walking away, as if I had been nothing more than a business transaction. He grabbed his suitcase, casting me one final smirk. "See you at the office, Anna. Do try to keep things professional." And then he was gone. I stood there, alone, in the middle of paradise, holding the remnants of a life that had never truly belonged to me. The divorce papers slipped from my fingers, carried away by the warm island breeze. And then, slowly, I pulled out my phone. I opened my messages. "The key you gave me, is that office still available?" James's response came immediately. Always was. I stared at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. Something sharp, unbreakable. Nathan Carter had played his game. Now it was my turn. I walked into Ashford Global Enterprises exactly 1 week after my so-called honeymoon, stepping through the same towering glass doors that had once symbolized my bright future. But this time I wasn't the same woman. Before, I had entered this building with ambition, eager to prove myself, to belong. Now I walked in with something sharper, something more dangerous. Purpose. The whispers started the second I stepped onto the 47th floor, the floor where I had once worked under Nathan Carter. "She's back. I thought she was on her honeymoon. Didn't she just marry Carter?" I ignored them, my heels clicking with measured precision against the polished marble floors. I had no intention of wasting time explaining myself. Let them wonder. Let them watch. Nathan thought I would disappear, that I would crumble under the weight of his betrayal. But he had no idea that I had returned not to be pitied, but to reclaim what was mine. It had been waiting for me, just as James Sterling had promised. The brass nameplate on the door read, "Anna Mitchell, Senior Financial Strategist." Not Mrs. Carter. Not Nathan's fiancée. Not the foolish woman who had been used as a pawn in a game. No, I was exactly where I was meant to be, and I was done letting anyone define me. When I stepped inside, James was already there, standing by the window, watching the city skyline. He turned at the sound of the door closing behind me, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You're early," he remarked. I shrugged, setting my bag down on the desk. I didn't see a reason to waste any more time. James studied me for a long moment, his sharp gaze searching for something. Perhaps weakness, perhaps hesitation. He found neither. "Good," he finally said, nodding approvingly. "Because it's time to get to work." I didn't seek him out, but fate had a cruel sense of humor. The first time we crossed paths again was in the executive boardroom, during a high-level strategy meeting. Nathan hadn't noticed me at first. He had been leaning back in his chair, effortlessly confident as he spoke about his team's latest projections. His usual smirk was in place, the one that had once charmed me, the one that had convinced me that I mattered. Then I stepped into the room, and everything changed. The moment he saw me, the easy arrogance on his face flickered. For the first time, I saw surprise, then confusion, then slowly realization. I didn't say a word. I simply pulled out my chair, placed my reports on the table, and met his gaze without flinching. James, seated beside me, gave Nathan a pointed look before addressing the room. "As you all know, we've made some structural adjustments," James said smoothly. "Anna will be leading the revised financial strategy for our international markets," reporting directly to me. A slow, almost suffocating silence filled the room, because in one sentence, everything had shifted. Nathan no longer held power over me. I was no longer his wife. I was his competition. And judging by the way his jaw clenched, he knew it too. I poured everything into my work. Every late night, every early morning, every ounce of energy I had once wasted on him. I redirected it all into building something greater than Nathan had ever expected me to. I worked alongside James, refining market strategies that would redefine Ashford's financial standing. And I thrived. The executives who had once whispered behind my back now sought my expertise. The analysts who had pitted me now admired my intelligence. Nathan's friends, the same men who had bet against me, now struggled to keep up with me. And Nathan? He was losing ground. The first victory. It happened 3 months after my return. I had been leading an initiative to expand Ashford's presence in the Asian financial sector, working tirelessly on a strategy that would secure a multimillion-dollar partnership. Nathan, of course, had been pushing for a different approach. For weeks, we had clashed in meetings, him subtly undermining me, trying to prove that I wasn't ready for this level of responsibility. I knew he wanted me to fail. He wanted to prove that I was still the same woman he had left behind. So, when the final decision was presented to the board, and my strategy was chosen over his, I made sure to savor the moment. Nathan sat across from me, his usual confidence dimming as the board members praised my work. "It's a brilliant approach," one executive said. "Impressive insight," another added. "This is exactly the kind of leadership we need." And then, James turned to me with a rare, satisfied smile. "Well done, Anna." Nathan didn't say a word, because for the first time he had lost, and I had won. 6 months later, the ultimate blow landed. Ashford was undergoing a major restructuring, and several departments were being merged, including Nathan's. And the new leadership position? It was mine. The announcement was made in the same boardroom where Nathan had once introduced me as his fiancée. Only this time, I wasn't just Anna Mitchell, the woman he had married for a bet. I was Anna Mitchell, the woman who now outranked him. As I sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the people who had once doubted me, I allowed myself one brief glance at Nathan. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see it. The tightness in his jaw, the flicker of disbelief in his eyes. The same man who had once dismissed me as a joke was now watching me rewrite the game. And the best part? I hadn't needed revenge. I had simply become better. I didn't need to confront Nathan. I didn't need to humiliate him. Because every morning, when he walked into Ashford and saw me sitting in the office that should have been his, he was already living the consequences of his actions. He had married me for $10,000. But now I was worth millions. Nathan Carter had gambled with my heart, and he had lost. Spectacularly. Revenge is often imagined as a fiery spectacle, dramatic, explosive, filled with moments of pure satisfaction as your enemy crumbles before your eyes. But the best revenge is silent, it's precise, it's earned, and it happens in boardrooms, not battlefields. Nathan Carter had once played God with my life. He had toyed with my heart, humiliated me in front of his friends, and walked away believing he had won. But here's the thing about bets, you only win if you know when to walk away. And Nathan? He had no idea that the game was far from over. By the time the Ashford Global Enterprises annual shareholder meeting arrived, I had done more than just regain my footing. I had cemented my legacy. Our expansion into the Asian markets had surpassed projections. The restructuring I had implemented increased efficiency by 40%. And under my leadership, Ashford had recorded its most profitable quarter in company history. Nathan, once the rising star of the company, was now just another fading name on the executive roster, watching, waiting, struggling to stay relevant. And the final nail in the coffin? The international division merger. Nathan's department, the very foundation of his influence, was being absorbed into mine, which meant that for the first time in his career, Nathan Carter would have to answer to me. The irony was exquisite. The boardroom was packed, every seat filled with executives who had once whispered about my downfall. Now they sat in rapt attention, watching as I presented a strategy that would push Ashford into global dominance. Nathan sat near the end of the table, his usual confidence replaced by something far less certain. He knew what was coming. I could see it in the way his hands clenched beneath the table, in the way he avoided my gaze. When I finally finished, a slow wave of applause spread through the room. And then, James Sterling leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Impressive work, Anna," he said smoothly. "The board has reviewed your recommendations, and we're in full agreement." A pause. "And as of today, we're moving forward with your proposal." My proposal, not Nathan's. Nathan cleared his throat, forcing a tight smile. "That's great news," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I smiled back, tilting my head slightly. "I'm glad you think so," I said lightly, "because you'll be reporting directly to me during the transition phase." Silence. A slow, suffocating silence as the weight of my words sank in. Nathan's jaw tightened. James, ever the strategist, leaned back in his chair, watching the exchange with interest. "If you have any concerns, Nathan," I added, keeping my voice pleasant, "I'd be happy to discuss them in a one-on-one meeting." Nathan's eyes flicked toward James, as if looking for some sort of lifeline. But none came, because Nathan Carter had just lost the one thing he valued more than anything: control. In the weeks that followed, I didn't have to actively destroy Nathan. He did it himself. He stumbled in meetings, his confidence fractured by the knowledge that he was no longer the favored one. His allies, those same executives who had laughed at my expense, began gravitating toward me instead. And Cameron, his so-called best friend, he jumped ship the fastest. The moment it became clear that Nathan's reign was over, Cameron aligned himself with me, acting as if he had always been in my corner. It was almost too easy. Nathan, once so smug, so invincible, was now alone. And the best part? I didn't have to do anything except succeed. One evening, just as I was finishing a report, there was a soft knock on my office door. Nathan stood there, looking less like the man who had once held all the power and more like someone who had finally realized he had lost it all. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I glanced at my watch. Not really. His jaw tensed, but he stepped inside anyway. For a long moment, he just stared at me, taking in the office, the desk, the title on the door that now belonged to me. "I never thought you'd come back," he admitted finally. I smiled. "That was your first mistake." His mouth pressed into a thin line. "Look, Anna, I know I messed up." I raised an eyebrow. "Messed up?" His throat bobbed. "What I did, it wasn't personal. It was just business." I let out a quiet laugh. "Right? Because betting on someone's life is just another business strategy. Isn't it? His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second. I didn't think you'd take it this far. I tilted my head. You mean succeed? Because that's all I did, Nathan. I didn't ruin you. I didn't sabotage you. I just did my job better than you ever expected me to. He had no response to that, because deep down he knew it was true. You really hate me, don't you? He murmured. I considered that for a moment, and then, finally, I shook my head. No, I said, my voice steady. I don't hate you, Nathan. You were the best lesson I ever learned. Something flickered across his face. Something dangerously close to regret. But regret wouldn't save him now. He nodded slowly, exhaling. So, what happens now? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Now, you do your job, and I do mine. That's it. No second chances. No redemption arcs. No dramatic declarations. Just business. And for the first time, Nathan Carter realized that he had become exactly what he had once mocked me for being irrelevant. Nathan didn't last long after that. 6 months later, he resigned. Quietly, without fanfare. His reputation already tarnished beyond repair. He took a position at a second-tier firm, far away from Ashford, far away from the empire he had once believed he would rule. And me? I didn't just survive. I thrived. I climbed higher. I led Ashford into record-breaking profits. I built a legacy that had nothing to do with him. And the most ironic part? Nathan had thought I was just a game, a gamble, something he could win or lose. But in the end, he had bet against the wrong woman. Because I didn't need revenge. I had something far better. Success. Success was supposed to be the endgame. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, turned my betrayal into a stepping stone, and risen to heights that Nathan Carter never saw coming. But something was missing. I had reclaimed my power, but my heart? It was still guarded, locked away behind walls I wasn't sure anyone could break through. Until James Sterling. The first time I truly saw James, not as my mentor, not as the CFO of Ashford, but as something more. It wasn't in a boardroom. It wasn't over spreadsheets or late-night strategy meetings. It was at a quiet rooftop bar, long after the office lights had dimmed, when the air between us had shifted into something I couldn't quite define. You've done it, he said, watching me over the rim of his whiskey glass. I raised an eyebrow. Done what? His lips curled slightly. Everything you set out to do. Nathan is gone. You're at the top. You won. I let out a quiet laugh, swirling the wine in my glass. I wasn't playing to win, James. I was playing to survive. He studied me for a long moment. Then, with the kind of quiet certainty that had always unnerved me, he said, You were never just surviving, Anna. You were always meant to lead. Something in my chest tightened. James had always seen me, not as an extension of someone else, not as a pawn in someone's game, but as my own force. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand, dramatic confession. No stolen kisses in the rain or sweeping gestures of romance. It was slow, steady. A foundation built not on lies and manipulation, but on mutual respect and trust. It was the way James would listen, really listen when I spoke, never interrupting, never underestimating. It was the way he would challenge me, not to break me down, but to make me sharper, stronger, more confident in my own decisions. It was the quiet moments. Late nights in the office, the two of us reviewing proposals over takeout, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes flicking toward me when he thought I wasn't looking. And it was the subtle moments. His hand grazing mine when passing a document, the way his gaze would linger just a little longer than necessary, the way his voice softened when he said my name. I should have seen it coming. But the truth was, I had been so focused on rebuilding my life that I never stopped to consider what it would mean to let someone new in. Until one evening, when James finally made it impossible to ignore. It was after an executive dinner, the kind filled with polite conversation and strategic networking. James and I had walked out together, the New York skyline stretching before us, the city alive with possibility. You know, he said, glancing at me with that unreadable expression, I've been patient. I frowned. Patient. He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. I knew you needed time. I knew you needed to build something for yourself before you could ever think about something else. Something else. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. I turned to him fully, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, uncertainty. There was none. I've watched you reclaim your power, Anna, he continued, his voice steady. I've watched you prove over and over again that you are stronger than anyone ever gave you credit for. And I need you to know. His fingers brushed against mine, tentative, testing. This, whatever we are, whatever we could be, it's not a game. My breath caught. For so long, love had been something I associated with betrayal, with deception, with a world that thrived on power plays. But with James, it didn't feel like a gamble. Felt like a choice I wanted to make. So I did. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't reckless. It was deliberate, like every decision he had ever made. Like he had been waiting for me to be ready. His hands cupped my face, his lips pressing against mine with a certainty that sent a shiver down my spine. And as I melted into him, I realized something. This wasn't a business deal. This wasn't about strategy or control. It was real. For the first time, I was stepping into something that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with trust. And it terrified me, but it also thrilled me. The months that followed were different. There were no office whispers, no raised eyebrows. Because unlike my relationship with Nathan, this wasn't a public spectacle. It was ours. Private, steady, unshakable. James never paraded me around. He never claimed credit for my success or used my name to boost his own. Instead, he stood beside me, an equal in every way, a man who never needed to prove his power, because true power didn't come from controlling others. It came from lifting them up. A year after we made our relationship official, James proposed. But this time, there was no ballroom, no audience, no cameras capturing the moment for social approval. It was just us. In our penthouse, overlooking the city that had once watched me crumble and rise again. James stood before me, no velvet box in hand, no rehearsed speech. Just him holding my hands, looking at me like I was the most powerful thing in the world. You don't need me, he said, his voice low. You've never needed anyone. And that's why I love you. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. But I need you to know, he continued, his grip tightening slightly, that I choose you, every day. Not because I have to, not because of power or business or expectations, just because it's you. And then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled a single silver key from his pocket. The same key he had given me years ago. The one I had once used as a lifeline. The one that had led me back to myself. But this time, it wasn't for an office. It was for a home. Our home. And as he slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized something. Nathan had once said that love was a transaction, that people were investments. But James had proven something else entirely. Love, real love, wasn't a bet. It was a partnership. One built on respect, trust, and the knowledge that no matter what happened, we would always stand beside each other. And for the first time, I wasn't just winning in business. I was winning in life. For real. For good. The conference hall was packed. Hundreds of eyes watched me from their seats, their anticipation palpable, their pens poised over notepads, ready to capture whatever wisdom they thought I would share. The stage lights cast a golden glow, illuminating the massive Ashford Global Enterprises Leadership Summit banner hanging above me. I had spoken at events before. I had been interviewed by the most respected financial publications, featured on the covers of Forbes and Fortune, praised for my vision, my leadership, my ability to reshape an empire from the ground up. But this moment, this wasn't about business. This was about who I had become. I took a breath, glancing down at the speech I had prepared. Then, slowly, deliberately, I folded it in half and set it aside. A murmur of curiosity rippled through the crowd. I smiled. I had a speech written, I admitted, letting my voice carry through the vast space. A polished, carefully crafted speech filled with business strategies and leadership principles. I let the pause settle. But I think we all know. That's not the story you came to hear. Silence. Total, unshaken silence. And then I began. Years ago, I was given a choice. My voice was steady, unwavering. I could have walked away. I could have let humiliation define me. I could have let betrayal break me. A hush fell over the audience, every ear attuned to my words. But I didn't. I looked across the room, my gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Because some bets? I exhaled softly. Some bets backfire. Recognition flickered across some faces. Others leaned forward, hanging onto every syllable. I let them wait. Let the weight of my words settle. When I first walked into Ashford Global, I was a nobody, I continued, an ambitious analyst with nothing but talent and work ethic. But I wasn't seen for my skills. I was seen as a pawn, a game, a bet. A few gasps, more whispers. I let them murmur, let them wonder. Then I smiled. And today, I gestured to the massive screen behind me as it flickered to life, displaying the figures from our latest earnings report. Record-breaking revenue. Market expansion that outpaced our competitors by 50%. A legacy built not on connections, but on competence. And today, I repeated, my voice quiet but sharp, I stand here, not as a pawn, not as a trophy, but as the CEO of the very company where I was once underestimated. The applause started slow. Then it built. And then it roared. I let it wash over me, not for validation, not for approval, but because I had earned this moment. And somewhere in the crowd, I knew Nathan Carter was watching. It hadn't been dramatic. There had been no fiery explosions, no public takedowns, no headlines exposing his deception. Because I never needed revenge. Nathan had destroyed himself, piece by piece, mistake by mistake. After resigning from Ashford, he had bounced between companies, each tenure shorter than the last. The confidence that had once been his greatest asset had turned into arrogance, making enemies in every boardroom he entered. His reputation, it shrank with every failed project, every missed opportunity, every executive who saw through his charm and found nothing of value underneath. And now he was sitting in the back row of this very conference. His name just another in a sea of attendees, watching the woman he had once gambled on stand at the top of the world. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't need to, because his loss wasn't my victory. My victory was mine alone. When the conference ended, executives and industry leaders flocked to me, offering congratulations, shaking my hand, eager to be part of whatever I built next. But there was only one person I was looking for. James Sterling stood by the exit, watching me with the kind of pride that needed no words. I walked toward him, and as I reached his side, he said, "You did it." I tilted my head, teasing. "Did what?" His lips curled into that quiet, knowing smile. "You didn't just prove them wrong, Anna." He leaned in slightly, his voice a whisper only for me. "You proved yourself right." My chest tightened, because he was right. I had never needed to win against Nathan. I had needed to win for me. And now, standing beside the man who had believed in me long before I had learned to believe in myself, I realized I already had. The next morning, as I stood on the balcony of our penthouse, coffee in hand, I thought about the girl I had been. The one who had once believed in fairy tales, who had thought marrying the right man meant securing the right future. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built her own empire, who had learned that true power wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder. It was about knowing your worth. James stepped onto the balcony, wrapping an arm around my waist, pressing a kiss to my temple. "What's next for you, Mrs. Sterling?" he murmured, amusement laced in his voice. I smiled. Everything. I had once been a woman who thought love was a gamble, that power came from proximity to the right man, that success meant winning someone else's game. But I had learned something far more valuable. Some women aren't meant to be won. Some women aren't meant to be saved. Some women, they build their own damn empires. And they don't just win. They change the game entirely. Forever. Nathan Carter didn't disappear. Men like him never do. I thought my story had ended. I thought I had left him behind in the wreckage of his own making. But the thing about people like Nathan? They don't know how to accept defeat. When I least expected it, when I had moved on, built my empire, and finally found peace, he came back. And this time, Nathan wasn't just a bitter man with a grudge. He was a man with a plan. The first whisper of his return came from Cameron Hayes, Nathan's former best friend, the one who had abandoned him the moment his downfall began. "Did you hear?" Cameron's voice was smooth, laced with curiosity as he sipped his champagne at a high-profile finance gala in London. I barely glanced up. "Hear what?" "Nathan Carter." He smirked. "He's back. And he has a new game to play." A chill ran down my spine. "Go on," I said, my tone calm, unreadable. Cameron placed his glass down, his eyes glinting with amusement. "He's found backers, real money, real power. People who want to bring you down, Anna." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, something dark and sharp coiled in my chest. Nathan had been dangerous when he was just a man with a bruised ego. Now he was a man with a vendetta and an army behind him. I should have expected it. Nathan was too arrogant to accept his own failures, but he was smart enough to find people willing to invest in his revenge. He wasn't just coming back for redemption. He was coming back to burn everything I built. "He's launching an investment firm," James said, setting a thick dossier on my desk one evening. "And it's not just another hedge fund. This is a direct threat." I flipped through the reports. The numbers were impressive, too impressive. "He's not working alone," I murmured. James nodded. "No, he has powerful investors, people who want to destabilize Ashford Global." I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the desk. Nathan wasn't trying to win back his career. He was trying to take mine. He was coming for my empire, my legacy. But he had forgotten something. I wasn't the same woman he had once played. I wasn't a pawn anymore. I was the one moving the pieces. The last game, and this time I was the one in control. Nathan's entire strategy relied on perception. He wanted the world to believe he had returned as a force to be reckoned with, stronger, smarter, more dangerous. He wanted to lure investors away from Ashford, to create doubt in my leadership, to chip away at the foundation of everything I had built. His biggest weapon wasn't money. It was manipulation. And if I had learned anything from my past, it was that I could play that game better than anyone. The biggest financial conference of the year was held in Dubai. Nathan was the keynote speaker. It was his moment, his grand return. But what he didn't expect. I was there too. When I walked into the hall, the murmurs started immediately. Nathan stood on stage, mid-speech, his confidence flickering for just a second when he saw me take my seat in the front row. Then he smirked. "Anna," he greeted smoothly. "Didn't think you'd be here." I tilted my head, lips curling slightly. "Oh, I never miss a good performance." Nathan chuckled, turning back to his audience, regaining his rhythm. For 30 minutes, he spoke about his new fund, about how it was positioned to disrupt the industry, about how investors were already lining up to support him. It was impressive. It was convincing. It was a lie. The moment he finished, I stood. "Fascinating," I said, my voice carrying through the silent room. "But there's just one problem." The massive screen behind him lit up and displayed everything. His financial records, the manipulated data, the investors who had secretly pulled out weeks ago. Nathan froze. The crowd began to murmur, whispers spreading like wildfire. Because his grand comeback? It was all smoke and mirrors, and I had just burned it all down. Nathan turned to me, his mask cracking, his breathing uneven. "You," I smiled. "You really thought I wouldn't be ready for you?" His jaw clenched. "You underestimated me once, Nathan. That was your first mistake." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just for him. "Coming back." I smirked. "That was your last." He had nothing left to say, because he had lost. For good. 3 months later, Nathan's firm collapsed. His investors abandoned him. His reputation, irreparable. He vanished from the industry, reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. And me? I didn't look back. I never needed revenge. I had power. I had success. I had a legacy that couldn't be touched. And as I stepped out of my office one evening, James was waiting for me, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "All finished?" he asked, handing me a glass. I smiled, raising it in a silent toast. All finished. We clinked glasses under the city skyline. And I knew in that moment, this wasn't just the end of a battle. This was the start of something bigger, something unstoppable, something that no one, not even Nathan Carter, could ever take away from me. The legacy that couldn't be stolen, a conclusion worthy of a queen. I once thought that power was something given, that it came from the right connections, the right marriage, the right last name. But I was wrong. Power isn't given. It's built, brick by brick, battle by battle, choice by choice. And now, standing at the top of an empire that I built, one that no one could take from me, I realized something. This wasn't just about winning. This was about rewriting the rules of the game entirely. The headlines told my story in bold letters. Heavy check mark, the woman who outplayed Wall Street. Heavy check mark, Anna Sterling. The CEO who redefined power. Heavy check mark, once a pawn. Now a queen, the businesswoman who won it all. Investors lined up to work with me. Corporate leaders sought my advice. Young women looked up to me, not because I had survived, but because I had thrived. But the real victory, it wasn't in the numbers. It wasn't in the power. It was in the freedom I had earned. The freedom to choose who I was, what I wanted, and what legacy I would leave behind. I didn't think about him anymore. Nathan Carter had been a shadow in my past, a mistake that once defined me. But now, he was irrelevant. Somewhere I was sure he was watching. Watching as the woman he had once bet against became something far greater than he ever imagined. But I didn't care, because I had already moved beyond him. And that was the best revenge of all. James Sterling was waiting for me when I walked into our home that night, the city skyline glowing behind him. "You did it," he murmured, pulling me into his arms. I leaned into him, exhaling softly. I know. This wasn't a fairy tale love story. It wasn't about a man saving me or giving me a happy ending. James had never tried to claim credit for my success. He had just stood beside me, believing in me even when I had struggled to believe in myself. And that was the kind of love I had always deserved. Not a game, not a bet, something real. One morning, not long after Nathan's name had faded from the business world entirely, I stood at the edge of my office, looking out over the skyline. A thought struck me. I had done it all. Heavy check mark, I had won the battles. Heavy check mark, I had conquered the industry. Heavy check mark, I had rewritten my story. And yet, there was still more to do. Because the real legacy of a woman like me, it wasn't just about what I had built. It was about who I could help rise next. So I made a decision, not to retire, not to step down, but to expand, to create something bigger than just myself, to mentor, to invest, to build a future where no woman ever had to fight the way I did. Nathan had once believed that I was just a stepping stone in his career, that I was replaceable. But history would tell a different story. His name would fade. Mine would live forever. Not because I had won against him, but because I had won for myself. Because I had proven that no one, no man, no corporation, no bet, could ever define my worth. Only I could do that. And I did. Spectacularly. Forever. Before we wrap up, I want to hear from you, the incredible True Tales community. Speech Balloon, have you ever faced a betrayal that changed your life? Speech Balloon, did you turn a moment of loss into a victory? Speech Balloon, what's the greatest lesson you've learned about success, love, or resilience? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences could inspire someone who needs to hear them today. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in rising stronger, proving doubters wrong, and defining your own worth, hit that like button. Lightbulb, want more powerful, real-life stories? Make sure to subscribe to True Tales and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Thank you for being part of this journey. This isn't just a story, it's a movement, and it's only just beginning. Rocket.